Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to one of the favorite sessions that everyone loves, a question answer series with our Bet Midrash, senior rabbi of the S&P, Rabbi Joseph Dweck. It's always you guys send in the questions and we get answers from our Rosh Bet Midrash. It's always fun. Letting everyone know that our book, our Sefer on the Yamim Noraim is out, and we're very excited for that. So I would get a copy before the holidays. And with that, Chacham, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I have a copy. Very good. All right. Thank you, Rav Ohad, as ever, for your care in administrating the Shiurim. And thank you all to those who have sent in questions. So, as usual, I'm going to try to answer as many as I can. Some of them I'm not going to answer, either because they're a bit too vague or because I don't know that this is, or I do know that this is not the best setting for the question that was asked, but I'm happy to answer some, in a different setting or in a more private setting. But otherwise, I would say for the majority of the questions, I was interested to hear them and, curious about, the ideas with regards to them, in terms of who, the asker, what was going on for you guys. So let's get right to it. And this is in no particular order, simply kind of how they were presented to me. Okay, so the first question is an anonymous question, but it comes from the U.S., and I mean the United States of America, not the United Synagogue. And that is the following. In the Mishnah, and can I remind everybody, please to mute, okay? In the Mishneh Torah, Rambam seems to suggest that we should go into isolation or live as a hermit if our society is corrupt. How bad does it have to get before we would need to do this? Can one argue that today's Western society is corrupt and we should model our communities in a way that isolates us, right? So this question is an important question because Harambam does seem to say that, and I'll bring up for you the halacha that the questioner is referring to. It's a halacha in Hilchot Derot. How do I share screen? Let me see. How do I share screen here? Why am I not seeing it? Let me see. One moment. It's not where it usually is. I think everything changed. Oh, here we go. Share screen. Okay. There we are. Okay. So this is a halacha in Perek Vav of Hilchot Deot, halacha Aleph. And Harambam writes as follows. He says, Derech briato shel Adam, liot nimshach b'deotav u'b'ma'asav achare'av v'chaverav. What Harambam is saying is that basically human beings are social animals and that we are influenced, whether we like it or not. And that is a key bit to this halacha here, that we are influenced, whether we like it or not, by those with whom we keep company, right? How it is, those with whom we engage. And that can be, remember, because we're talking about the mind and how it is the mind calibrates itself, right? The mind calibrates itself with other minds, right? It is extremely susceptible to thought from outside thought and to ideas from outside ideas. And these ideas can be dangerous and problematic. So he sets that line up at the opening, and he says, the nature of a human being, derech briato means the way of his creation, is liot nimshach b'deotav, is to be pulled in his deot, in his thinking, u'b'ma'asav, in his behaviors, ahare'av v'chaverav, after his friends and his colleagues, right? The people that he spends the time with. V'noheg kiminhag anshe medinato, and of course a person behaves as people behave in their society, right? So, the British and the Americans and the, whoever else, the Israelis, they just don't act like each other. They don't think about things, many things like the other does. And certainly there are certain things that we hold that are, common in terms of being human beings on the planet. But, there's a huge amount that does not overlap in terms of how it is that various individuals and various groups of people relate to the nature of reality and how they frame the way that they interpret the world. So what does Harambam say? And this is very important. Harambam says, therefore, tzarich adam lithaber latzadikim. Therefore, it is imperative that a human being who wishes to be tzaddik, or who wishes to engage along the path of being a tzaddik, to spend time with tzaddikim. V'deshev etzel hachamim. And for that matter, if you want to be a thinking individual and a person who is able to sense and assess and to frame reality in the closest approximation possible to what's really going on, spend time with the hachamim, because this is what the hachamim do. They have set themselves to live this way and to engage this way. And one should do so tamid. One should do so always, so that you can learn. Now, I think this is extremely, just before we get into kind of, what do you do? Do you live as a hermit? It's extremely important to understand this basis that Harambam is putting out. And something that I point out very often, relatively often, is that this idea about thinking for oneself is a farce. Right? Human beings really do not think for themselves. There's really no such thing as a human being thinking for oneself. What we do is we think like the people with whom we associate. And that could also be the people that we read or the people that we absorb in terms of information and rhetoric and so on and so forth. Those that I expose myself to are the ones that I'm going to start thinking like. Yeah, they are the ones that I'm going to be influenced by. So what do the Hachamim say? The Hachamim never say, think for yourself. The Hachamim say, don't think like those people, think like these people. Don't think like the people over there, think like the people over here. And who the people over here? The Hachamim and the Tzaddikim. And what they say is, spend time with them. Notice, it doesn't even say, learn from them. It says, spend time with them, cling to them, become their friends so that you might learn from them, right? So this is more a question of with whom do you spend your time? Who is your social group? Your social group is one of the most important decisions that a person can make, because the people that you spend time with will be the people that influence your thought. And that is something that a human being, for all intents and purposes, really cannot get away from. It's very difficult to get out of that. So then Rambam says on the other side, yitrachek min harsha'im, right? Keep away from people that are selfish and destructive and counterproductive and so on and so forth. Why should you keep away from them? So you don't learn from them. Notice again, to reiterate, Harambam does not say, if you're going to spend time with Rasha'im, make sure not to learn from them. That apparently is not an option, right? Because if you're going to spend time with Rasha'im, you're going to learn from them, whether you like it or not, whether you're aware of it or not. All right, and he brings a pasuk with regards to this. And then he says, V'chen im haya b'medina. Now, it's not just about your close 5 friends that you spend most of your time with. What if you live in a particular society? Shemin hagoteh hara'im. That the ways that they do things are not good. Ve'en anasheh ha'olchim b'derech yashara. And its population, right, its citizens do not walk in an upright path. What should a person do? Leave that place and go to a place she'anasheh tzadikim. You should leave that society and live in a society that is more righteous and does right. V'nohagim b'derech tovim. And then he says, well, what if there is a situation in which, no matter where you go, society is a mess? Then these 2 words are key. Kemo zemanenu, like in our times, where no matter where you go, things are a mess. And Harambam says close to 900 years ago, like in our days. So back to the questioner, right? To the question, he's saying, he seems to say, right? Can one argue, how bad does it have to get? It's already bad. In other words, it was already that bad in Harambam's time. And it's very important to recognize that it was already that bad in Harambam. Now, you're going to say things have gotten better. Yes, on a certain level, things have gotten better with the general population. On a certain level. What do I mean on a certain level? Think about the nature of humanity in the time of Harambam and then times that we're living in now. How were people treated? What was the thinking of individuals at that time? How were women treated? How were poor people treated? How were people that were handicapped treated? How were people that were learning disabled treated? How about people that had mental difficulties? How were they treated? Think about the nature of hunger in the world in Harambam's time. Has it gotten better? Has world hunger improved since the time of Harambam? Yes, so a great many cases can be made that in general, the population of humanity on the planet is doing better now than it was doing in Harambam's time. But the question is ultimately, can we say that society is walking righteously? And that I don't think that we can say. I don't think that we can say that overall society is walking righteously. And there's many reasons for that, right? And if we're going to say essentially that the society is walking any more righteously than it was in Harambam's time in local levels, well, then what Harambam says is Yeshiv Badad V'idom. You need to pull yourself away from that to some level. Now, what does that mean? So he says, look, so first he says you should pull yourself away, disengage to a certain degree from the general population. Right, and I'll explain what it is that ultimately that means. Because think about Harambam. In other words, he says in our time, what did Harambam do? Right, Harambam didn't live as a hermit. Harambam went to work in Cairo every day, and then he came back and he held clinic, and practiced medicine, and then he was engaged with the general Jewish community and so on. Right? Was he engaged in society? Well, no, not really. Okay, so I'll unpack that in a minute, a little bit. I know we're only on the first question, but it really is a very important question. And it is very important, very pertinent. So what Harambam ends is, if you can't just keep to yourself, if they don't even allow you to be able to keep to yourself where it is that you're living, then you need to go to the desert and live there, isolated, and so on and so forth. All right, so I think that to be able to question what is the practical aspect of this particular halacha is that a person must be, if a person wants to be righteous and a person wants to be a hacham, then a person must be highly scrutinizing of how much you engage in society in general. And what does that mean? That means, where are you spending the majority of your time? And when I say where are you spending the majority of your time, I mean both mentally and physically. Where are you? So you're in society, and you're in society casually. Just know that you will become part of that society in nature. Your behavior will become behavior that mimics that society, and your thinking will become part of the behavior that thinks like that society. Now, you may think that you are the, kind of the fish swimming upstream in your particular society, but I'll tell you one thing, and this is one thing that is personal, that I've experienced having lived in many different places, right? I've lived in the United States, I've lived in the UK, I've lived in Israel. And there's one thing that I recognize. People think that they're being different, but they're not being very different than the people with whom they live. Right? They can think differently than the other people that they live with, but for all intents and purposes, they are like the people that they live with. Right? So Brits are like Brits. They could be right-wing Brits and left-wing Brits and all kinds of Jewish Brits and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, if you're an American and you come to Britain and you meet any single one of them, they're all British. And they all think like British people, and they all live like British people, and they all function like British people, and they see the world through British eyes, and vice versa. You go back to New York or wherever it is. And by the way, there are microcultures, right? So you go back to New York, and there's a bunch of different New Yorkers, and there are New Yorkers that are completely at odds with other New Yorkers in terms of the way they think, but they're all New Yorkers. And they all actually talk like them, think like them, see the world through New York eyes. And then you go to LA and you realize, wow, they're really weird, right? They're really out. They're not like anybody. Yeah, they're not like the New Yorkers, not like the Brits. Yeah. So they're all humans, and to a certain degree, but they all do the same thing. There is something that you simply recognize by the mass of people that they all hold in common. And that is Harambam's point. Harambam's point is you cannot get out of that. So you need to think about, and all of us need to think about this, right? To what degree am I genuinely engaging in society? When I say engaging, I don't just mean kind of going to the supermarket or whatever it is. To what degree am I drinking the Kool-Aid of society? And the reality is to a certain degree, Harambam is making a point. You don't know. You don't know. There's a certain level of it that you just cannot really know because you don't think about what you think about. You just think about. You just think. And you think how the people around you think. That's why Harambam opens with that line. So, look, is it practical to be able to go live as a hermit in the desert? No, it's not practical to live in a hermit. And Harambam didn't live like a hermit in the desert. But Harambam did refrain or pull back from society. He was not part and parcel of the social fabric. He was definitely a man of his time. He was definitely a man that came from the environment in which he lived. There's no question about that. You can't extract him from that. But he was as independent a thinker as you could be in those situations. And the reason he was is because he connected himself to tzaddikim and hachamim. How do you do that? Well, the good thing is that we actually have the thoughts of people who are dead accessible to us. You can genuinely choose to keep the company of the Tanaim and the Noraim, if you wish to, on a daily basis. That's why I'm a tremendous proponent of Daf Yomi, right? People miss the point of Daf Yomi. They think, oh, how much are you going to remember if you're learning a Daf a day? The point has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with what you're going to remember. It has to do with that you spend time with the Hachamim every day. And if you spend time with the Hachamim every day, guess what happens? They're your friends. And you start to think like them. So that is what you do, right? You have to choose who's your crew, as we might say in modern times, right? Which is a modern term of society. Who is your crew? Who are the people that you are going to spend your mind, right? The time of your mind and your behavior with. So behavior, it's hard to be able to behave like the Hachamim of the Talmud outside of theory, right? You can read what they say and you can do to the best of your ability what it is you would think they do. But we are also, because we're a social species, we mimic. So you have to choose who you want to mimic. And that is one of the most important decisions that anybody will make in their life. Okay, so that's the most I can give now. I can give a whole shiur on that, but good question. And there I leave you with that. Okay, next question. This is a question from Israel, also anonymous. Who are some lesser known rabbis and thinkers that you think more people should know about? Very good question. I'm only going to share one. Michael Wishgrad, The Body of Faith. Absolutely believe that every single person should read that book. It's a thinking book. It's not the easiest book in the world to read, but I think that it is one of the most important. To me, it is top three modern thinking modern Jewish thinkers. And he's one of the last real thinkers. He's not just a person that's kind of regurgitating or reframing Divrei Hachamim, whatever. He's a genuine thinker. And I would say that it is not only valuable to read his thought in general, I would say now, during these times, especially because of the last year. It is one of the most important things that any Jewish person could read. So I highly, highly encourage Michael Wishegrad, and I think I'm shocked that more people don't know about him. You can find, we were talking. So tomorrow I'm going to do a talk with Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik about Sfaradim and Ashkenazim. But I do have on the Chabura, there is a discussion of the both of us, both he and I, on Michael Wishegrad. So I encourage you, kind of want to get an insight into that, you can look at that discussion and hear a little bit about what some of the themes are. But yeah, hands down, that is what I would suggest. That he's lesser known. Very, very many people don't know about him, unfortunately. And he's just brilliant, an absolutely brilliant thinker, original and very, very serious and important ideas. And you will when you read it, you'll see that I speak a lot about what it is that he writes in there, and I present it in various ways in shiurim, and I think it's fundamental. Okay, number 3. What should our mood be during Elul and during Yamim Noraim? Any practical examples, please? And this is from London, also anonymous. So I'm going to assume that when you say what should your mood be, that you mean mood and not mindset. And I'm going to answer your question in terms of the way that you asked it, right? So the mood is a question of kind of like, what should you be feeling, right? What's the vibe of the environment? So if you think about Rosh Hashanah, well, the first thing that I'll say is that both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur appropriately must be framed in terms of your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, so one of the things that people tend to do is to think about oneself in terms of their particular circumstance coming into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And while, it's understandable that people do that, it's a mistake to do that. The whole of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is not just a question of what is going on with you in your life. The question of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is what is going on with you in your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and looking at your life vis-a-vis that relationship. Okay? So what is the mood? The mood of Rosh Hashanah is a mood of an assessment, right? It's a mood of we're going to take 2 days to really bring our attention to the trajectory of our lives in terms of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's desires for us, terms for us, covenant with us, creating of us, and so on and so forth, right? So God as creator, God as king, right? Which means that he is essentially the judge and the carer and the supporter and the provider and the ruler, right? And how it is that I see myself in terms of that relationship. So Rosh Hashanah, together with Shofar, right? Shofar is what is essentially awakening us, right? Bringing us to attention, calling us to attention, to be able to judge, right? So we're judging, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is judging. And Rosh Hashanah, the whole mood of Rosh Hashanah is, and this is important, is not fear, right? It may include some level of trepidation, right? It may include some level of apprehension, and it isn't quite joy, which is why halachically we don't say to people on Rosh Hashanah Chag Sameach, because it is neither a Chag nor is it about Simcha. But we do come in with glad hearts, and we even come in with excitement. Why do we come in with excitement, right? Why do we run into the synagogue? Why do we run towards the services and the sounding of the shofar? Eagerly, right? The mood is an eager mood. It's an eager mood with reverence. So the mood is eager reverence. Why are we eager? Because you have an opportunity of a lifetime. Imagine this, okay? Let me try and frame it. So you're asking examples. I'm going to try and frame it for you. Imagine that, look, you are left as a citizen to live your life for the year. And you recognize that there is going to be an assessment of the top authority of your life. And in that assessment, there is going to be opportunity given to you to be able to genuinely and truly address your life, the circumstances of it, the ups and downs of it, the pluses and minuses of it, the achievements and failures of it. You are going to be given an opportunity to have an audience with the only one that can make a difference for you in your entire life and how it is that you're living in terms of that connection, right? Your relationship with this individual, which essentially is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, imagine that you have problems that you need to talk about and address. Imagine that you've made mistakes that you want to clear. Imagine that you've had very significant achievements that you want to be able to bring to the altar of this relationship and offer them properly. Imagine that you have an opportunity to be able to come in and explain yourself and to consider yourself and to really be able to have a proper assessment of who you are and what's going on. Would you not run to be able to have that opportunity? Or would you just kind of avoid that so that you don't have to have any of that mean anything or matter in your life? No, you run to that opportunity. Of course you do. So it's an eager reverence, is the mood of Rosh Hashanah. Knowing that that the whole milieu of Rosh Hashanah, right? The whole frame of Rosh Hashanah is we're going to actually sit down and consider your life holistically and benevolently, right? And I think that's very important. HaKadosh Baruch Hu holds Rosh Hashanah not because he's vindictive, Has v'shalom. HaKadosh Baruch Hu holds Rosh Hashanah because he's interested in his creation succeeding. And he's interested in being able to support you, and for that matter, the relationship, to whatever degree possible, given that you're interested in that happening, right? So you have to ask yourself, am I interested in that happening? Well, run to Rosh Hashanah then, because you have an opportunity. Are you not interested in that happening? Well, then you have no business on Rosh Hashanah. You can sit on the wayside and let yourself simply be passively judged like everybody else. But the reason why Rosh Hashanah is an engagement for us, even though we realize and believe that the entire world is being judged on Rosh Hashanah, and assessed for that matter on Rosh Hashanah, is that we have the opportunity to be mutually engaged with it, to actually have a say in how things go. And that's why the formula for us on Rosh Hashanah is Zuchrenu L'Chaim. Remember us for life. This is what we want. We want to live. We want not just to have a pulse. We want to be able to live the best lives that we have. We want to be able to renew our commitment to our relationship with you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Renew our commitment to our covenant, Ribbono Shel Olam. Renew our commitment to being the best creations that we can be in terms of your desire and hope for us as the creator. That's it. So what is the mood? The mood is an eager reverence to the amazing opportunity that is the day. So beyond that, I've given tons and tons of shiurim on this, so they're available, and I encourage you to listen to them. As far as Yom Kippur is concerned, Yom Kippur is a day of forgiveness, right? So the mood is contrition, right? The mood is the openness to being forgiving and needing and being open and interested to forgiveness, right? So again, to frame this, if there is a situation in which you know that you've misstepped, you know that things have failed at your hand, either with your own life, with people around you, with circumstances, with your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so on and so forth. All of that ultimately has to do with a reckoning with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? So if you recognize that there is something there that needs to be addressed and rectified, and you care about the relationship that you have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're running to Yom Kippur as well, right? You realize that is an unbelievable chance that you have to be able to genuinely apologize, to rectify the relationship, to re-engage in the graces of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and be absorbed and embraced and loved. That's what Rosh Hashanah is. It's about forgiveness. It's about atonement. Atonement in English is built from the words at-one-ment, right? To become whole again in terms of who you are and your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I mean, how could you not feel the unbelievable excitement and an opportunity of that? That's why the Hachamim say, I mean, it was one of the greatest days in our calendar. It is one of the greatest days in our calendar. Lo Yamim tovim liYisrael ketu be'av yom kippurim. So that's the mood, right? There's reverence and there's eagerness to be able to have an opportunity to be able to make real difference in your life and in your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in significant ways, and to address and rectify failures that all of us have. And the difference is that during this period of time, our Mesorah is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is fully open to engaging with us on those terms. Okay, so that's that. Next question. Okay, can you please explain whether tefillah is only to better oneself, or if it is something that God can hear and act upon? If the former, well, it's not the former, how can we say tefillah b'tzibur is heard more than yahid? How come we mention certain times as being et ratzon? So the former is just not true. It's not about making yourself better. That's not what tefillah is for. Tefillah is a dialogue with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And why would he not hear that? So I've given so many classes on tefillah that I encourage you, whoever asked this question, to listen to them. And I know for sure that there are versions of those classes on the Chabura, so I encourage you to search on the Chabura for them. I don't know if we can put a link in the notes here, perhaps, for if you find it, but whatever it is, I've given so many classes on tefillah, so I encourage you to listen first about what is the nature of tefillah. What is it that we're doing in tefillah? Why are the halachot of tefillah the halachot of tefillah? And after you hear that and listen to that, we'll see about the question. Okay, we'll see about the question. But there's no question about the fact that it is not the former. It is not about making ourselves better. It is about dialogue with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? That's what it is. And so the whole idea about a tzibur is that you have not just one person, but you have 10 people of Israel that are coming together to be able to stand in front of the Shekhinah and put themselves in unison to engage with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's very powerful. Yeah, if it's done right. Okay. Okay, number 5. Hello, Rabbi Dweck. Hello. This is from Miami, Florida, and this is from, and the name was given, so I hope I can say the name, Akiva Yeshurun. Hello, Akiva. In learning the halachot of Talmud Torah in the Mishneh Torah, I saw that Harambam makes a distinction between studying Torah Shebaal Peh and what he calls Gemara. And then you explain here, which I think I know why you say this, but I don't know if there's, how clear that is. Or you say, or understanding the essence and history, quote unquote, of the mitzvot in order to understand what is asur and mutar. Yeah, okay. I think the Gemara is not quite that, but I hear why you said it, because he says about learning Harit davar mereshito. Perhaps maybe that's why you said it. So look, yes, Harambam, of course, makes a differentiation between Torah Shebaal Peh and Gemara, and it's a halacha in the first parak of Hilchot Talmud Torah. Really, 2 halachot, Yod Aleph and Yod Bet. I'll read for you. The Harambam says that a person has to split the learning of Torah that he does at the beginning of his learning, right, as he's learning the data of Torah, into thirds. And part of the 1/3 has to be dedicated to the written Torah, Torah Shebichtav. Included in Torah Shebichtav is what we call Divrei Kabbalah. That's basically the Nevi'im and Ketubim, right? And he says that explicitly in the next halakha. And then he says, V'shlish Torah Shebaal Peh. and a third of it has to be in Torah Shebaal Peh. And then he says, Shlish, another third, is Yavin v'yaskila hari davar mereshito, right? You should be able to understand and contemplate how conclusions were reached and in light of their origins, right? What are the developmental elements of thought with regards to Torah and the development of Torah and the thoughts of Torah and the expounding of Torah and so on and so forth. And yotzi davar midavar, right? You should be able to extrapolate ideas from one set of ideas to others. Yidameh davar davar, you should be able to compare and contrast and be able to find innovative elements in that. Yavin b'midot she'Torah nidreshet b'hem, you understand the hermeneutic principles through which Torah is studied and law is derived, okay, and so on and so forth. So these are all things that lend themselves to innovation and conception and conceptualization, right? And that is a third bit. So it's not data, right? So the first 2/3 are data. There is a fixed set of what we call Torah Shebaal Peh. It's a fixed library, right? That's what we call Tanakh. Tanakh is a library. It's not a book. It's a library of books. And that is required in terms of learning. And then there is a set of data that we call Torah Shebaal Peh. Torah Shebaal Peh is a set of data. Harambam writes that you can find the sufficient presentation of that data in his Mishneh Torah. He says the Mishneh Torah comprises the entirety of Torah Shebaal Peh. So what is this Gemara? So Harambam says this other bit, right, that is comparing, contrasting, and extrapolating, and innovating, and delving into the kind of the movements of ideas and the sequence of ideas and so on and so forth. All of that is called Gemara, says Harambam. So when we're talking about that with regards to learning that, it's about your mind, right? So once you learn Torah shebichtav and Torah shebaal peh, and you have the data that comprises those entities, right? Those libraries, as it were, then the question is, well, now what are you going to do with all that information? I'll give you an example. I saw somebody wrote an article years and years ago comparing Bil'am to Avraham Avinu. And the entire kind of essay that they wrote was just showing the comparisons between Bilam and Avraham Avinu. And then it ended. And my question to them was, well, so what? So lovely that you've showed the comparison. What does it mean? What are your interpretations of those comparisons and correlations? That's Gemara, right? That is an example of Gemara. How do we deal with all of that? So it's completely different, right? Those things are different. One is a set of data. The other is a system of thought, right? And how it is that I think about, work with, develop the data that it comprises Torah shebichtav and Torah shebaal peh. Now, you can study Talmud, you can study Gemara, but Gemara is essentially simply a presentation of that being done, right? So if you want to learn Torah shebaal peh, it's probably better to learn the Mishneh Torah. If you want to learn Gemara, or if you want to be able to train your mind in Gemara, it's good to learn Gemara, right? It's good to learn the Talmud, because you kind of see the system that is used by the Hachamim to be able to do those things. Specifically the Talmud Bavli, because the Talmud Bavli opens itself to show you how they got to what is it that they're doing. Why is the halakha this way? Why do we think these principles? Yeah. But it's only examples, right? So you should be doing this. Ultimately, when you have the ability to be able to, which is why Rambam says, once you get the data down, you should spend all of your time in the now what, right? Now that you know all of this information, what are you going to do with this information? What are the implications of this information? What are the innovative ideas that comes from this information? And so on and so forth. Yep. Okay. So I hope that answers that. Very good question, Akiva. Number 6. How do we understand the concept brought up whereby God decides on Rosh Hashanah how much money will be made throughout the year? This is a question from Brooklyn, New York. The answer to that is it's not a real thing. halachically. Hakadosh Baruch Hu does not decide necessarily how much money a person is going to make on Rosh Hashanah. The halacha is, and what we hold officially, is that Hakadosh Baruch Hu determines one major issue on Rosh Hashanah: who is tzaddik and who is a rasha and who is a benoni. Those are the determinations of Rosh Hashanah. Those other specifics are not really things that happen directly on Rosh Hashanah. It could be that a person who's determined tzaddik may have ramifications in terms of the money that they make on Rosh Hashanah, or for the next year. But that's not a direct determination of Rosh Hashanah. The halacha doesn't mention anything about that. And then, so, people ask, I'm going to probably talk about this with Rabbi Soloveitchik, but there's a very famous prayer that said on Rosh Hashanah by the Ashkenazim called Unitane Tokef. And I was giving the shiur on Perek Gimal of Hilchot Teshuvah to a group of Ashkenazim, and somebody raises, and all Rambam talks about there is just tzaddik, rasha, benoni, and the ramifications of that. And somebody raised their hand and said, "What about Unitane Tokef?" I said, "Well, first of all, Sfaradim don't say it, so it can't be that core and fundamental." And the Ashkenazim hold from this, like this is the prayer, right? We don't even say it, right? The Sfaradim don't even say it, and it doesn't even register, right, for us. There's kind of an illusion in the middle of Musaf to kind of Ezo lacherev, Ezo lasova, Ezo. Okay, but those things are also, they're not halachic. Those are not the core Mesorah about what it is that's going on in Rosh Hashanah. Those things may have permutations that result from the determinations of Tzaddik, Rasha, and Benoni, but otherwise, those aren't really what it is that Rosh Hashanah is about. It's really not what Rosh Hashanah is about. And people make a mistake thinking that praying for the money the whole time on Rosh Hashanah and missing the fact that you might be determined to be a Rasha or Benoni on Rosh Hashanah. And that's the thing that you should be dealing with mainly on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, but also I've given many shiurim on that, so I encourage you to look for that. Okay. What are your recommendations for finding shidduchim? This is from San Francisco. My recommendations are none, because I'm probably the worst person to ask about shidduchim. So I apologize, but that's not part of my toolbox. It's not in my toolbox. But I do wish you, please God, to find your shidduch. That is best for you. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. I'm going to answer this next question, but I'm going to caveat the answer and say that this requires more than a short answer. But I'm going to kind of put the answer into a particular direction. And I'm aware that it may raise more questions than answers, but nonetheless, that's why I say that it needs better treatment. What drives the decision for the Torah to ban an institution versus compromise with the institution? For example, it seems that the Torah is willing to compromise with things like slavery or yefat to'ar and say, quote, do it like this instead of how it's commonly done. While other times, like when it comes to avodah zarah or injustice, it seems to strike it down without compromise. So first of all, it's a good question. Second of all, I wouldn't call these things institutions. So I take issue with, the Torah banning institutions or compromising with institutions. But again, I don't want to be a stickler too much on what it is you're saying. Essentially, if I understand the question, look, these are things that are deep parts of society, or were at least, deep aspects of society. The reality is that they're still deep aspects of society. They just change shape. So, the fact that slavery, the abolishing of slavery, it doesn't mean that slavery is not occurring in the world anymore. What has happened, and this is beneficial, is that slavery has gone underground. It is no longer socially acceptable internationally to consider slavery as a normal part of human life. But slavery still happens all over the place. We still do it, okay? So that's number one. Number two is that the drives, as an example that you give about yefat to'ar, right? I mean, that's just a question of how it is that, people deal with their sexuality, with their drives, with the coupling of aggression and sexuality and so on and so forth, which is, I mean, like, you have to be blind not to realize that those are integral to the nature of a human being and how it is that those things manifest, especially in war, right, and so on, are all over the place. So what the Torah is doing in those circumstances is saying, look, these things are fundamental human drives. They are fundamental to the nature of humanity. And there is a path towards a sublimation and ultimately mastery with regards to these kinds of things that will probably take a glacial time frame. Because in order for these things to be able to actually affect significant change and to kind of move the needle, as it were, in terms of how it is that we relate to these things and deal with these things, it takes a tremendous amount of practice, growth, and change, right? Which is, you're dealing with millions and millions of years of development that we want to kind of affect in the course of, a 70 to 80-year lifetime. George, it's absurd to think that's how things are going to run. Not to mention that some of the things are just hardwired. So I'm not saying that slavery is hardwired. I do think that the world can, in some capacity, move beyond that. I do think that the world can, in some capacity, move to a maturity in terms of how it is that we deal with aggression and sexuality and so on and so forth. We're not there yet. I don't even think that we're close to it, but we've certainly made progress in those areas. And what the Torah is doing is guiding us. It's giving us arrows, right? The Torah is not going to, or isn't, right, at least, suggesting to us that all things should be shut down and changed in terms of, kind of a cold turkey thing, at least with the things that you're, the first things that you're suggesting, because it recognizes that human beings don't work that way. So what it does is it points towards a direction. Now, what people don't recognize with regards to Torah is that they look at Torah and think that it's supposed to be read at face value in terms of its words on the page. And one of the things that we recognize, which is an integral part of Judaism, is that the words on the page are principles and that the interpretations of those principles are part of our work with the interacting of the book. And that is something that we have to deal with. And that's why Gemara is such a big deal. Going to the previous question, why Gemara is such a big part of how it is that we think. With regards to Avodah Zarah, it's a bit different because Avodah Zarah really cannot give an opening, right? The Torah can't give an opening to that because the whole thing is based on HaKadosh Baruch Hu and our relationship to him. And if you're constantly looking at the wrong God and worshiping the wrong entity, you don't get out of the gate. You can't even begin to do anything appropriately and correctly because the reality is that the alternative to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is you. Whatever God that you're praying to is your God, right? You've created the God. And if you've created the God, then you're praying to you at the end of the day. Avodah Zarah is always a prayer to yourself. It's always a service of yourself. It's also always a worship of your own self in some form or another. And it's very, myriad forms. So that has to be shut down. And even as that is shut down and given absolutely no room, as far as the Torah is concerned, it continues to happen for at least 1,000 years in its overt sense. And it continues to happen today, 3,000 years later, in a less overt sense. We still are, gaga over all kinds of things that are Avodah Zarah adjacent, which is things like superstition and beliefs in all kinds of things that take me away from genuinely communing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in faithful and consistent terms. And essentially, whatever it is that we do that removes that or that compromises the faithful, consistent Tamim Tiyeh Im Adonai Elohecha engagement with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Avodah Zarah adjacent. At best, at worst, it's full-blown Avodah Zarah. It's still present today. Yeah. Okay. So that's the best opening line that I can give you with regards to that. But like I said, more can be done on that front. All right, we've got 8 minutes. All right, so I guess in development of that, I'll read the following question. This is from the Bronx. from Anonymous. When I dismiss modern day miracles, such as the Baba Sali's bottomless arak bottle and other Hasidic fairy tales, I get asked, but do you believe in the biblical miracles? If so, why is it so far-fetched to believe in these stories, which were also witnessed by many, including my grandfather? Why is it different? How are they fundamentally different? They are fundamentally different. The way that they are fundamentally different is to recognize that you have to ask the question, right? The fundamental question that you have to ask is, why miracles? What's the point of miracles? So there's an assumption in what you're asking, right? The assumption what you're asking is that miracles themselves are there to woo us, right? They're there to kind of prove something to us. They're there to be able to get us to recognize that, there's a God in the world and we should believe in the Torah or something because the Ara doesn't finish or whatever the case may be. And nothing could be further from the truth, right? It is a terrible mistake to think that the point of miracles is to get people to believe in anything. That is not the point of miracles. So when you recognize that that in and of itself is a flaw and a fundamental one, right? It's a fundamental flaw. Well, then you recognize that the things that the Torah is presenting as miracles and the things that you are talking about with regards to the Hasidic fairy tales or the Baba Sali's Arak or whatever the case may be are completely different things. So let's use the most famous one, right? The splitting of the sea. What does Harambam say about the splitting of the sea? Harambam says about the splitting of the sea, look, it was a logistical thing. This was a logistical tactic. It was not done in order for the people to believe in God and the Torah and Moshe Rabbeinu. Not only that, Harambam writes more than that. He says that a person who believes because of miracles, yesh bilibo dofi, he's got a crooked heart. It's a big problem, actually, to believe and that have a person's faith based on miracles. So what is the Baba Sali's tactical need, so to speak, right? And I want to be very clear. I'm casting no aspersions whatsoever, has v'shalom, who am I, mi ani afar tahat raglav, on the Baba Sali. All I'm saying that is if you're going to compare the bottomless ara to Kriyat Yam Suf, they don't come into the same universe. One is a magic trick, or some kind of trick that comes from whoever the Baba Sali is. And the other is a logistical entity or a logistical tactic that is presented by Kadosh Baruch Hu for Bnei Israel to be able to come to safe haven. So, okay, there was a need for it at the time, and that was it. It wasn't, look what I can do, woo, woo, right? So if it was a thing that, we needed to have Ara, and we could not be without Ara, right? And so that's what the Baba Sali's thing served. Okay, so then, believe in that. If you saw it, then that was okay. But again, what is the believe in it? Believe that it happened? Regardless, whether believe it happened, didn't believe it happened, I don't know, why is that Ma'aleh Morid? Why should that make any difference whatsoever? The bigger question is, what difference does it make? What difference does it make? So the difference that Kriyat Yam Suf makes is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu opened a path for Am Yisrael where there was none. That's the significance. And what is it? Vayishma Yitro, said, well, Yitro heard this and said, Atayadati, look, HaKadosh Baruch Hu actually cares about you. There's a commitment that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for you. Look what he did. Not, wow, the sea split, he must be God. That trick is just the top trick. And that's the whole point. That's the whole point about the makot and so on and so forth. It's not about magic tricks. It's about what is Hakadosh Baruch Hu's relationship to Am Yisrael and to Paro and to so on and so forth, all in their own thing. So the fact that astonishing things happen, okay, good. Chazal Baruch, astonishing things happen all the time. What difference does it make? So it's not a matter of believing in them or not believing in them. It's much more important question to say, okay, so the Ara did not finish. Now what? What would you like to say as the implications of that? What are the points that you'd like to make with regards to the fact that the Ara didn't finish? I don't know. I can't imagine what on earth, that what difference that would make. That's all. And finally, from Mexico, from Rafa. How are you, Rafa? How to deal with the Agadah today? Where can we find good sources or interpretations? Okay, so look, it's a good question. And I will say this, I think two things. If a person wants to engage with Agadah, right, these are the kind of the stories that are presented, or the parables, or the various kind of, ideas that are presented in the Talmud and the Midrashim that seem to be cryptic, right, or seem to be, beyond a straightforward presentation of ideas or data, but more kind of riddles, right? That's essentially how it is that Midrashim often are presented. How are you supposed to deal with Agadah? Well, the first thing that I would say is you should look at what the Hachamim say about Agadah, right? So Harambam writes extensively about Agadah in the Hakdamat to Perek Helek, and he talks about how it is that we're meant to relate to those kinds of things. What is it? I look at it as parables and riddles of the Hachamim, says Harambam. You should read about what Rabbeinu Abraham ben Harambam writes on Agadah. Read what the Ramchal writes about Agadah. So the first thing that I would say is orient yourself to how it is that we classically relate, that the Hachamim classically relate to the nature of Agadah. That's the first thing, right? So that's a frame, so that when you're reading it, you know how you're meant to approach it. You know how you're meant to see this thing. The second thing I would say is, in order to be able to begin to interpret Agadah, right, in order to be able to start with interpreting Agadah, you need to get to know the Hachamim who presented the Agadah to you, right? You need to kind of get, who are these people and what are they saying to me? And you can't really get who these people are and what they're saying to you unless you get to know them. And that goes back to one of the earlier questions. You need to get to know the Hachamim if you want to understand what the Hachamim are saying. You cannot simply come to what it is that the Hachamim are saying if you don't know them. And the way to know them is to spend time with them, to study them. So everybody wants, and I say this, I know I'm saying this a little cynically, but everybody wants a shortcut. Everybody wants to know, what do I need to read in order to be able to find a good interpretation of Agadah? Look, I'm sure there's things you can read. That's not the point. The point is, even when you read those interpretations of the Agadah that you are looking for, Rafa, right? How are you going to assess them? Are you just going to take them as they're presented? Are you going to think critically about them? So either you accept, right? I'm not speaking to you directly, Rafa. I'm talking to everybody, right? Either you accept that these really are divrei hachamim v'chidotam, that the Agadot really are riddles of hachamim, and that they aren't accessible to you unless you really roll up your sleeves and become a hacham. And I'm saying that quite honestly, right? I mean, I know that, I love the Chabura, and, it's a passion of mine, and I think it's the most wonderful thing, that's come up, in the last 5 years. And if I didn't, then I wouldn't be so kind of personally invested in it. It's absolutely unbelievable. But you have to understand that the Chabura is shorthand, all of it. It's all shortcuts. And it's that way by design. There's no way that you can get out of that. You can't do this. And I mean, my dream, right? And I know that there are others amongst the Habura that share the dream on some level or another, is ultimately to be able to invest enough in the Habura and expand it so that there's actual learning going on. But of course, what does that take? Of course, actual learning actually takes time. And it takes sacrifice. And it takes effort, and it takes consistency and commitment. There's no shortcut way to become a hacham. So, Agadot can be understood by hachamim, and maybe talmidei hachamim. And in order to be able to understand Agadot, first, you look at the Hachamim's, entree into Agadot. You look at their introductions into Agadot so that you can at least orient yourself to what is it you're actually reading here. And second, you need to get to know the Hachamim who speak them to you so that you can have an idea of what it is that they're talking about and why. And that is why, by the way, Agadot are embedded in the discussions of the Hachamim, right? So in the Talmud, at least, the Agadot are embedded in the middle of sophisticated logical discussions of the Hachamim on legal issues. And suddenly you're talking about, in the middle of the discussion of Gida Nasheh and the Gomeh Me'ashofi and how it is that you need to be able to do the Nikur, and suddenly you're in the discussion of Yaakov and Esav and the unique nature of their relationship and how they dealt with each other and what they thought. All of a sudden, you're in that story just after dealing with the detailed halachot of Gida Nasheh. Okay, so in order to be able to understand those things, it really does require, you have to put in the time and the effort and the rolling of sleeves up, as it were, to be able to get there. And there's really no way around that, in all honesty. Yeah. So you want me to tell you who has nice pirushim? Yeah, there's a bunch of people that have nice pirushim. But even Rambam wanted to write a book on explaining the midrashim, and he decided not to, because he said, like, what's the point? I mean, at the end of the day, I'm doing nothing. I'm ultimately ruining what is the Hachamim set out to do, and that's not, it's not the point. So instead, he wrote the Moreh Nevuchim. So that's my answer for that, right? There's no, I mean, I commend you for wanting to find one, but really that's my suggestion to you. Okay, so we're 4 minutes over. I thank you very, very much for your wonderful questions, and always a wonderful opportunity to be able to sit with you guys and to share. And I wish everyone, I mean, Rosh Hashanah is just around the corner. I wish everyone to Shani Rabot, Naimot V'Tovot. If you're in London, Motzei Shabbat, join me for Selichot, midnight Selichot. I'm going to give a shiur at 10:30, and we have dinner, shawarma, and hanging out, and then we'll do Selichot from 12 to 1. And if you're in London, by all means join us, because it was really wonderful last year. Everybody came together, and it was a very nice way to kind of prepare for Rosh Hashanah. And if you're not, well, I wish you to Shani Rabot, Neimot V'Tovot, and that it should be a meaningful and uplifting Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And indeed, Tichle Shana v'Kedloteha, Tahel Shana u'Birchoteha, and inshallah we should be able to see Shalom and Yishaptim Betah. Okay? Good night.
Thank you so much, Chacham. Also, just a point that this Sunday we're going to have a interesting conversation with on why science matters with Rabbi Eli Feder and Rabbi Aaron Zimmer, hosted by our Sina Kahan. So hopefully we'll see everyone there. That's over, everyone.